Hello and welcome to our Bordeaux wine tasting, celebrating Bordeaux Wine Month this September. I'm Clive Powell, I'm the retail manager at Cambridge Wine Royston, and very pleased to be taking you through a fine selection of wines from this famous region. I think independent wine merchants are a really good place to go if you want to seek out good Bordeaux. We've got a great range here in Royston, and it's a region whereby you might want a little bit of particular advice about style and vintage. There can be quite considerable diversity within the region. The wines that we're going to go through in this session are just a small offering from our excellent Bordeaux range, but they should showcase the diversity within the region and the quality as well. So you might be sharing this tasting event with your friends and family. You might want to take one wine per evening. You can do it however you want to. Do you remember, obviously, you can pause the video at any time to enjoy that wine and savour that wine. Do take your time with it. It's a wine tasting, not a race. Do remember always, please, to drink responsibly. That's very important. And all of these wines, I think, will probably want to have a little bit of food to go along with them. We'll try and make some suggestions if we can, but that will always help. And I think one final thing to remember whenever you're tasting wine and really concentrating on it is try and make sure that your palate is in a good place. So if you've just cleaned your teeth, if you've just had a strong cup of coffee or something, go and have a good drink of water, perhaps have just a piece of bread to get your palate sort of nice and neutral, and you'll be in a good place to start to really focus on those wines. Okay, let's move on. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why the wines of Bordeaux are so successful. This is a region that's very famous. It's a reference point for all wine lovers, wine connoisseurs, as well as everyday drinkers, and indeed winemakers across the world. Bordeaux is seen as, a real reference point. It's an ancient region of winemaking, dating back to Roman times, and its production represents a staggering 1.5% of the world's total vineyards. Essentially, the entire region is given over to viticulture, and it's been very successfully established for hundreds of years. The main reason for this is, I guess, that it has this quite exceptional situation geographically in the world, this incredible terroir. Terroir is nothing to be afraid of. It's a convenient French word that means all of those geographical features in one word. So we're talking about rainfall and sunlight, simple things that you need to make your grapes ripen. Bordeaux seems to combine these things in a really convenient way. They have long, warm summers. They have cool breeze from the Atlantic, which really helps cool down your vines during the warm months. They have quite diverse terroir within the region. So you've got a big river coming down, and therefore Bordeaux is often thought about as being divided between the left bank and the right bank. You'll have to imagine my hands being the other way around, because but on the left bank you get predominantly the big blockbusting famous chateau, those famous Bordeaux Reds, and what they call that region that they call the Médoc, and on the right considerably other famous names, Saint-Emilion, and there's a lot of different terroir within the region, different soils, different microclimates, tiny diversities in the aspect and the drainage. It's really important to remember in old world wine production, you're not allowed to irrigate your vines. So all of the water to grow these grapes needs to come naturally, and that's where the influence of the rivers is very significant. Also within the region, blending of grapes is really key to what they do. So we'll talk a little bit as we go through the wines about the different grapes that are used, but they will use a select range of grapes, and they will stick with them because They have been tremendously successful over the years. They're focused on what they do in Bordeaux, in the sense that they have this incredibly successful product and they continue to make it. They're always going to be looking towards the future in terms of technological advances and differences in winemaking and viticultural practices, but they are pretty happy with what they've achieved, and what they've achieved are very beautiful crisp whites, a really interesting and quite diverse array of reds, and beautiful sweet wines, all of which we will try. It's quite impressive that within this relatively select region you do get quite significant diversity. They are also successful in the sense that in Bordeaux they've always been merchants. The huge river that comes into the city, it's been a trading port since the 17th century. They are merchants and they're that way minded. And so the fact that Bordeaux wines have become a very significant investment tool for many people is perhaps not a coincidence. But for those more interested in everyday consumption, we'll make a start with our first wine in a few moments. Let's have a look at that. Okay, so we're going to start with a beautiful Bordeaux white. People often don't think of Bordeaux wines in terms of white wine. We always tend to think of red wines, but they've always produced white wines and they're always quite striking. This is Chateau Argadon. They're based in the Entre-deux-Mers, which is the sort of region south of Bordeaux, between the two rivers where they split into the Dordogne and the Garonne. So it's a large flat plateau. This wine is made from Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon. So Sauvignon Blanc, people buy it from all over the world, but quite rarely from Bordeaux. Again, the Bordelais like to blend, so they're blending about 65% Sauvignon, about 35% Semillon, and the Semillon is just going to round it out quite nicely. When we do a wine tasting, we always have a little look at the wine in the glass, and if you put it over a bit of white paper, you can see it quite nicely. It's quite clear, fairly clear to see through, but with a little kind of more coloured rim around it. Very pale lemon colour. I'm going to give it a swirl, and this is something we always do just to get a little bit more oxygen into the glass and liven up that nose. That is a very rich aromatic nose. It's a really, really lovely blend. It's got some quite pronounced tropical fruits. You're going to have to do this a few times, people. This is how it is. Every time you smell something, your brain is going to immediately store it and then go, and the next thing, please. So this is where you might detect some smells that are slightly unusual. And that's absolutely nothing to worry about. And it's where you'll detect some smells which are delicious and enticing, which may or may not be within the wine. This is the interesting thing. But I'm getting some really nice notes of peach and apricot. I think a little bit of lychee. And then what you might think of as more typical Sauvignon notes, a little bit of gooseberry, just a hint. A little bit of elderflower, just a hint. Quite subtly done, quite well integrated, but definitely aromatic, quite enticing. Let's have a try. It's a nice creamy palate. Not as acidic or as zingy as you might find in some other Sauvignons. Definitely feels very creamy on the palate, quite sort of mouth coating. It's got a little bit of tannin in there, so you can feel a slight sort of firmness and body to the wine. actually quite full-bodied for a white wine, and those flavours do come through. So you get those nice peachy notes. There's maybe something like a little bit more zesty, a little bit of grapefruit perhaps coming through. It's overall, I would say, very appealing, quite easy-going. You know, nothing too complex about this, nothing challenging at all. Very, very nice, very pleasant, and I think, you know, it'd be quite happy with quite a lot of things. I think it'd be very happy on its own as an aperitif. I think it would probably come into its own as a food wine. It's got that body to it, so you know, I can see this with a chicken salad or something, you know, reasonably robust like that, as well as fish, shellfish, the obvious things that you might have with something of this nature. But I am impressed with the texture of the wine. It has a real smooth, quite glossy, creamy palate, which feels really lovely in the mouth. It's worth noting, I mentioned we talk about Bordeaux in terms of red wine. Red wine production in Bordeaux is about 90% of the total production, so it's no great surprise. What this means is that the white wines are quite undervalued and very reasonably priced. And this one we retail at $11.99. I should say it's an absolute bargain. Very nice. Okay, so we're going to talk about Château Franc Bourdron. This is a 2014. What's nice about Bordeaux is you can get this range of vintages, and people are sometimes really hung up on vintages within Bordeaux. We try not to be quite so hung up on it. We always say good winemakers will make good wine every year. Conditions do differ within the region year on year, but the main difference that makes is essentially a commercial one. In a good year, winemakers can probably make as much as they want, or at least as much as they're allowed to produce, and that's brilliant for them. In what's known as a good year, a good vintage, you will find wines that are powerful and tannic and long-lasting, and that's brilliant if you want to use them for investment purposes. It means you can lay them down for a long time. But in every vintage there are wines that will drink younger and older, and there are different styles within it. So this is from the Appellation Control area of Montagne Saint-Emilion. So it's not within Saint-Emilion proper, but there are sort of satellite villages around that town, which are more or less on the same sort of terroir and can produce certainly great quality wines, but don't have that very prestigious appellation name, and so are much better value. This is very, as I say, similar terroir to Saint-Emilion. Is clay and limestone, and that produces excellent conditions for the Merlot grape. We're going to find that this is a blend of about 80% Merlot and 20% Cabernet Franc. So generally in Bordeaux, the three workhorse red grapes are Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc and Merlot. Merlot ripens a little bit earlier in the season. Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon especially will ripen perhaps 2 weeks later on. So that's really practically convenient, because it means you don't have to pick all of your grapes all on the same 2 days and have all of your pickers running around like crazy and getting it all into the winery all at the same time. It's a practical advantage, but it's also the way that, you know, over the many years, the winemakers have found a way of making the conditions work for them and making great wine out of it. This is a family-owned site. They are fully organic and certified organic, and they produce this wonderful wine from this chateau since 1923, so they're getting the hang of it. Let's have a little look at it, and we'll see once again within the glass. It's a nice kind of a cherry red, I guess. You're going to see again a little rim around the outside, and that comes up when you get a rim. It just shows that the wine has a little bit of age to it. Essentially, the centre of the wine has faded. And so when you see a pronounced rim around the outside, you can note that the centre of the wine is faded, and therefore it's got a little bit of age on there. Putting it to the nose, some lovely fruity notes at the front of the palate, blackcurrant and a bit of blueberry. Oh, it's really good. There's a bit of ground coffee. There's maybe just like a little hint of cocoa. It's quite complex, but you know, in a very agreeable way. This is the thing. I think sometimes people find the word complexity to be a bit challenging, but really this is what you want from good food, good wine. You want it to throw lots of different flavours at you. So really lovely nose. Not too pronounced, not leaping out of the glass. You have to work for it a little bit, but it's definitely there. The fruity notes really nicely judged, I think, and as I say, you can keep on sniffing. You're going to get different things. That's just the way your brain and your olfactory bulb are working here. They're going to pick things out differently every time. Okay, I'm very excited about trying this. Let's give it a go. So I'm making slightly disgusting noises. That's what we do. That's what everyone should do. Getting a little bit of oxygen through the wine as it's in the mouth is the way to really get that wine enlivened and also pick out the various sort of technical qualities. So what you get to start with, you get some quite nice acidity. You can feel that your cheeks tingling a little bit, so that acidity is going to pick the wine up, pick the flavours up. You can note a little bit of tannin. So tannin is present in all red wines, but quite particularly in Bordeaux. Tannins give a structure for the wine to have a length and to have essentially a backbone for the fruit to hang off. When we talk about length, we're essentially talking about how long do you feel that wine is still working its magic in your mouth after you've finished your sip. So, I mean, I put my glass down, but I can still feel the structure of the wine in my mouth. I would still say that it's still going. The acidity now has backed down a little bit. The fruity flavours come through, and they're very much there, as I mentioned before. The kind of blackcurrant and blueberry, maybe a little bit of like cooked strawberries in there as well. That's quite nice. There's some slight spicy touches, nothing too crazy, but maybe a little bit of cinnamon to sort of tie in with those cocoa flavours. It's got very, very impressive length for a wine that we're retailing at $13.99. Really, really good structure to the wine. It's quite powerful. It's quite a modern style, by which I mean the flavours are quite intense, the fruit is quite upfront, but I mean it's quintessentially Bordelaise. It is this sort of almost indefinable fruit flavour that they bring into their wines that you just don't find anywhere else. A bit of bramble fruit and a bit of everything else, very, very nicely composed and put together. A very, very impressive wine. I think it would go really well with some quite powerful foods, so maybe some like Asian style duck would be absolutely ideal with those spicy notes. Maybe like a steak and Stilton, some quite powerful flavours, where we may see that later on some of the reds want something a bit more subtle. I think this could definitely handle something fairly intense. Great wine, very impressive. Okay, so next we're going to try the Chateau du Corneau This is a 2016 from the Margaux region, and this is in the decanter. So I thought I'd use this opportunity just to mention that with the red wines, when we do a tasting for a red wine, we will normally decant it. It's been in there for about an hour and a half. You can certainly do it longer. You could do it not quite so long if you don't want to. We have a very clever aerating funnel which pushes the wine out. But all this is doing is putting some oxygen into the wine and allowing it to breathe, which just allows a little bit of the acidity to back down and a little bit of the flavours to come together and to come up a little bit. So I'm going to pour it from the decanter. If you don't have a decanter, get someone to buy you one for Christmas. But otherwise you can use any vessel, doesn't matter. You can use a jug or anything that's clean, pour it in there, and if you want to serve it from the bottle, you can just pour it carefully back into the bottle. Again, a little filter is quite helpful for that. It's not essential, but the wines like this just love to be allowed to open up a little bit. So this is from Appellation Contrôlée Margaux. The Appellation Contrôlée system is complicated. I may do a separate video all about just that. For now, let's just say that there are regions within Bordeaux that are particularly prestigious, and they are essentially geographical locations. There is a Chateau Margaux, which is very, very famous and very expensive, but there are many, or several anyway, there are several other chateaux within the Margaux region. So it just means that it's a particular region within the Bordeaux area. It's on the left bank, what they call the Médoc, and so that will tell you immediately that this is going to bring some Cabernet Sauvignon into the blend. The soil here is a little different from the right bank, where we have clay and limestone on the right bank. On the left bank, it's basically a big gravel shingle bank. It's a huge, huge bank that's been pushed up from the Atlantic over many years, but it's very, very gravelly, very sandy, and really quite poor soil. And this is a very good thing for growing vines. You want poor soil. You don't want rich fertile soil. You want quite poor soil so that the vines have to work really hard to produce fruit. What that means is that the fruit that they do produce is concentrated. What you don't want is masses and masses and masses of grapes. This will basically make your wine pretty dilute and therefore fairly unappealing. So the classic kind of Médoc blend of clay and gravel, growing here Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon and a little bit of Petit Verdot. So we've got about 50% Merlot, about 45% Cabernet Sauvignon and about 5% Petit Verdot. All of these grapes are permissible within the Bordeaux system. There's a couple of others that they are allowed to use in terms of red grapes, but pretty much never do. But very occasionally you might see some Malbec, very occasionally some Carmenère. But these three, Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, are the workhorse grapes, and then occasionally a little touch of Petit Verdot, which might add a little sort of aromatic quality. Before I have a look at it, let's have a think about how it's been aged. So this will have been aged in barrique, which is the sort of relatively small oak barrel, and that will hopefully give it a little bit of oak influence. We will again see about 50% of those barrels were new wood, so we'd expect to see something from that. Let's have a look at it. Again, holding it over your convenient piece of paper. So this is a little bit of a sort of brighter red colour. Again, you've got a touch of a rim, but this is a 2016, so it's still reasonably young wine. The rim not quite so present therefore, but a kind of brighter garnet red perhaps in the majority there. So as always, giving it a really good swirl. Let's put it to the nose. Now that's a little bit more restrained than the Chateau Franc Bourdon. It has an intensity about the bouquet which is interesting. So it's not as vibrant, it's not as obvious, but it has a kind of power, or a suggestion of power. It's like a suggestion of good things to come. So you get some nice red fruit notes, a bit of strawberry, and a little bit of cherry. And perhaps some raspberry as well. And then you also get some sort of smoky and almost toasty notes. So that's probably going to be the influence of that new oak in the aging process. When oak's used in, shall we say, lesser wines, you get quite a pronounced vanilla flavour. I don't imagine we're going to get that here. I haven't spotted it yet, but those sort of toasty notes can be rather elegant and rather lovely. It's an intriguing nose, and it's definitely got plenty to offer. Let's see how it drinks. Okay, it's a much rounder palate. It feels like a much bigger wine, so it really fills the mouth. You get that quite high acidity. You can feel that kind of lifting the wine up, but you get this real sense of a big round mouthful of wine, chewy and quite satisfying in that simple way. It's framed very nicely by its tannic structure, and the tannins are quite ripe, so you're not feeling something that's very, very dry and dusty, but you're definitely feeling something that's giving the wine a real sense of power, without being too intense, still with good subtlety, but with a really nice kind of weight to it. It's a kind of lingering, very elegant wine. And unlike the Franc Bourdon, we can see that the flavours are more reserved, they're more subtle. The wine is more harmonious, and things don't sort of stick out of it. It just comes together very, very nicely as a very agreeable, very delicious, and very satisfying wine. Margaux, as you'd expect, comes with a little bit of a price tag, and goodness, they can go a lot higher than this, but we're selling this for $24.99, and that would seem to me to be a pretty good investment into the experience that you will have with this bottle, which is delightful. And this is what you get out if you've gone and bought yourself a really nice rib of beef. I think especially this would go very nicely with lamb. So if you have a lovely roast shoulder of lamb with perhaps a little bit of garlic and rosemary in there just to lift some of the notes out of the wine, this would be the wine that would absolutely frame that beautifully. I think it's got the power to carry off some game as well, pigeon, something like pheasant, or something with slightly more pronounced flavours would work very well. But I like the idea that even though this is quite a young wine, relatively speaking for Bordeaux anyway, you could have that after a meal on its own with perhaps just a nice bit of hard cheese and really enjoy the wine for itself. It's a very, very lovely thing. Whether or not I can quite pull out the aromatic qualities of the Petit Verdot, I don't know, but I very much like the harmonious nature of this wine. It's really nicely judged. So we are now going to try the Chateau Pierrebonne 2010. This is from the Haute-Médoc, and it's from a really exciting estate. So hopefully this won't come across as too complicated. This is how it works, okay? You have an estate, they have a top cuvée, and they release the majority of the wine under that cuvée. But under the Bordeaux guidelines, the Appellation Contrôlée system, they are somewhat limited as to how much they can produce as that top cuvée. So what we tend to say is they're sort of limited in the yield which they can produce under that cuvée. And so it's very common for lots of chateaux to release a second wine. So that is basically a wine from the same estate, made in the same winery, by the same winemakers, with sometimes slightly younger vines, sometimes not. That is what we have here. So we're tasting Chateau Pierrebonne. It comes from Chateau Pierrebonne, and Pierrebonne is a really interesting estate. They are on the border of Pauillac. They're about 2 miles from Chateau Lafite, but their vines cross over the border between Pauillac and the Haute-Médoc appellation. So they're not 100% Pauillac. And despite the best efforts of the owner of this estate, who has been soliciting the French government for many years, he has been unable to gain Premier Cru status for his wine. So it's a Cru Bourgeois, and that's a great thing. But it is not a Premier Cru estate, and it is not therefore able to command that kind of pricing, which is very bad news for the owner of this lovely estate, but great news for us consumers, because it means that the wine is sensibly affordable. But hopefully what we're going to see with this wine is we're going to see some real quality. It comes from this prestigious and very well established site in terms of its terroir, this beautiful gravelly soil on the left bank, and it's seen quite significant investment in recent years as well. So we've really seen quality soar in this particular chateau. It is a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. So this is where our Cabernet Sauvignon is really going to come in and play a major role. It's about 68% Cabernet Sauvignon, 32% Merlot. If we have a little look at it in the glass, we're going to see that it is a slightly denser appearance. It still has that rim, and remember that this is a 2010 vintage, so the wine, as we're drinking it now, is already 10 years old from when the grapes are picked. Remember, when we talk about vintages, the vintage date is when the grapes are grown and picked that year. The wine will not be released onto the market until potentially 4 to 5 years later. You know, you can't buy a 2020 Bordeaux this year. Grapes haven't been picked yet, but when they have been picked, you know, they're going to make the wine, they're going to age the wine. They do tend to release onto the market pretty quickly, but it will still take a few years to come through. Going back to what it looks like, it's a nice kind of deep garnet with somewhat of a rim, but it's not particularly pronounced. What we should expect from this wine is some real structure. 2010 was seen as a really good year. A lot of what that means is, as we may have mentioned before, are wines that are going to be really good for aging and therefore for laying down and for investment purposes. This 2010 will very happily enter its drinking window about now, maybe about a year or so ago, and it will keep drinking very well for at least another 10 years. And if you bear in mind that this is the second wine, if you get a 2010 vintage from a top cuvée, that would go even longer. Let's try the nose with a jolly good swirl and see what it has to offer. Now, I should point out that I didn't decant this wine because I didn't have a decanter, but what I did do is I poured it into the glass about 4 hours ago. So it's had that long to have some air into that bit. and also that puts some air into the bottle, so that the wine in the bottle will open up a little bit as well. But that's slightly closed. This is the benefit of a decanter. Excuse me. You can get that wine really opened up quite quickly. But it's a subtle nose. It's not leaping out of the glass, but it's all there. It's quintessentially Bordeaux. And the first thing we'll try and pick out is the fruit. And so you do get some classic notes of cassis, that sort of concentrated blackcurrant. You get a little touch of leather. Then I just got a really nice lifted nose of blackcurrant. It really came through again. Sometimes, as we've talked about, when your brain can identify something, it may take a while for your brain to pick it up, and you're smelling it and you're going, what's that? And then at a wine tasting with many people, someone will say it and everyone can then smell it. It's quite a nice thing. So I've just done that for myself, and I hope you're getting that experience at home. There's some nice fresh herbs, quite subtle, but definitely in there. And there's a lovely bit of cedarwood. So the oak influence here is bringing those woody notes and also the leathery notes to kind of back up the fruit flavours. It's actually opened up quite nicely just over that minute or so. You can see that I'm doing this again and again on the nose, and I know some people will find this a little bit strange, but for me, it's really getting the most out of the wine. It's bringing a little bit of anticipation into the process before I actually look to drink it. I think that you can often get a wider range of flavours on the nose of a wine rather than through the palate, and this is all about your olfactory bulb. But it's definitely delivering on the nose in a rather lovely, subtle, yet complete way, and I'm looking forward to giving it a try. Okay, so what we have there is a wine that is very, very nicely structured. And I'm going slowly because the wine is taking its time. It's got some lovely lifted acidity, which is just tickling the inside of my cheeks. It's got quite stunning length, which is very much still going. Really, really lovely concentration to the wine. So you get those flavours that are there present on the nose. They're pretty much there in the same sort of way on the palate, which is quite interesting. Sometimes the nose, those things don't always pick up on the palate. That's really got it all there, and it's just starting to phase now. But still, my mouth feels full and very, very happy. This is what they talk about when they talk about a good year. This is a superb vintage 2010. Already, there's not a great deal of 2010 available from some of the top chateaux because it's all sold. We're fortunate to pick up some good parcels of this wine. It really is top quality Bordeaux. Left bank Bordeaux particularly, with this structured style, with this concentrated flavour, with the fruit backed up with these secondary notes, so that the cedarwood, the leather, the herbs are all there underneath, backing everything up. It has just superb structure and concentration. I'm really, really impressed. This is an opportunity to get out the rib beef, or a nice rare roast beef. I haven't talked enough about vegetarian options, but this wine would be really happy with something with mushroom based. If you've got some exciting mushrooms somewhere, smoked aubergines, that sort of thing, it would pick up those smoky notes. It would definitely work with that. Strong cheese, of course, but do think I'd want to put this with a meal. I don't think I would want to have it on its own, even with a little bit of cheese. It really wants some food. It wants to have that that power balanced out by something else in the mouth. It's a really exciting wine, and I can't really believe that this only costs $17.99, and I'm going to go to the shop right now and buy a bottle. It's just too good. Next, we're going to try some sweet wine. In Bordeaux, they make a beautiful range of sweet wines. These are wines that sometimes are, a little bit ignored, possibly slightly maligned. Normally, when people try them, they realise just how much fun and excitement that can be within them. So this is Chateau de Gravas. They're in Sauternes. We're drinking the 2016 vintage. And this comes in full and half bottles. It's quite useful. It's a very concentrated thing. Half bottle can be quite a useful thing. So they're based right in the heart of Sauternes. They're adjacent to some very serious top Cru Classé estates in Barsac. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the process of how this wine is made. It's a very natural process. It's a very intensive and quite long-winded process. Sauternes is down towards the south of the city of Bordeaux as the river runs down. It's quite low-lying land, and there is a conjunction of rivers round about where this site is. Every morning in the season you get a lot of mist and fog in the morning. What that does is that it keeps the grapes very cool and stable, but it also produces what they call noble rot, or in the Latin it's called botrytis. This sometimes sounds a little bit strange, but what happens is that you get your grapes going mouldy on the vine. Okay, sounds slightly revolting, but what happens to those grapes is that they shrivel down due to this noble rot, this rotting effect. They shrivel down, they're kind of covered in mould. It really concentrates the flavour. The grapes, I should say, is Semillon. In this wine it's 100% Semillon. Sometimes they'll blend with a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc, but 100% Semillon in this case. Once you have your bunches of grapes on the vine that are rotting, you will have a team of pickers going in, and they will hand pick individual berries off the bunch. So normally when you pick a bunch of grapes, you either use a really excellent and exciting machine, or if you're hand picking, you'll go and snip the whole bunch off and take those bunches via crate into the winery. This is where you're hand picking individual berries off the bunch, and you'll have 3 or 4 selections through the season to make sure that you're getting all of those particular grapes. So it's very labour intensive, and that's why these wines can be, relatively speaking, quite expensive. The wines are then made, so the grapes all squashed down now almost like tiny little raisins, will be very gently pressed, and the juice will be taken and aged, in this case about 18 months in oak. It's a rather splendid process, as I say, completely natural, that's been developed over hundreds of years, and once the wine is made, it will keep for anything up to 50 years. You know, this is a wine that unopened you can sell it for decades. Let's have a look at it. It's a rather beautiful golden colour. Now this is relatively young, I suppose, 2016. So it's kind of light in the glass, a light sort of pale gold. It has got a little bit of a rim there. they can go really quite dark with age, and that, if you were doing a blind tasting, might tell you were drinking a wine that was particularly old. But a nice looking thing. Let's see what the nose can give us. Whoosh. Okay, and the answer is lots and lots and lots and lots. Goodness me. When I've done Bordeaux tastings before, this is the moment where I stop talking, because this is the moment where everybody just really enjoys the multitude of flavours that are coming from the wine. And I'm kind of tempted to do that on this occasion, so as to not give the game away. I might mention just a couple of things. I mean, it's just delightful. It's a lovely, lovely nose, really interesting, really different from anything else. You get some kind of like lime marmalade is mainly the most prominent thing that I get. You definitely get a little bit of sort of quite intense dried apricot. There's lots and lots and lots. I think, you know, talk amongst yourselves on that one and decide what you can pull out of it. It's just something you can keep going back to. It has so much to offer, it's lovely. This might feel a little bit different from some of the other wines. So when we put it into the mouth, let's see what happens there. Outstandingly delicious. Okay, so it has a sweetness, but it's really not sweet in a cloying way at all. It's got some serious acidity. You can feel that acidity really searing the cheeks, and that acidity is balancing the sweetness in a really lovely way. So it's lifting the wine, it's giving the wine this kind of presence and this kind of shape in the mouth. It's juicy. The flavours are all there pinging around. It's an absolute treat. This wine is incredibly versatile. We shouldn't think of it as dessert wine. They're quite keen in Bordeaux to call this sweet wine, not dessert wine, because although it makes an excellent accompaniment to many desserts, or indeed just as a dessert on its own, you can drink it in many ways. It's lovely as an aperitif. Chill it down a little bit and have it as an aperitif. It's great with many foods. It's really good with Asian flavours, so you can certainly have it as a main course with an Asian influenced menu. It is sensational with blue cheese. If you're a fan of blue cheese, get a little bit of Sauterne and knock your socks off with that combination. It works incredibly well. And I think, you know, certainly have it at the end of a meal, just as a vin méditatif, something to just sit quietly and calmly and enjoy it for what it has to give. The half bottle, which, you know, in a little serving is going to last a long time because it's not the sort of thing you really want to glug. The half bottle comes in at $12.99 and the full bottle is $22.99. So when I say expensive, it's really not at all expensive, considering it is probably the most delicious thing you're going to have had all year. It's a triumph, and I heartily recommend it. This is the sort of wine that not enough people open their minds to, and I strongly advise you to do so as soon as you can. So there we have it, a lovely range of wines. Thank you for joining me on this virtual wine tasting. I hope that we've given some interesting facts, but more importantly just showing the really impressive diversity in the styles of this region. It's a region that you can just keep going back to and always find new things. They do these beautiful white wines that are really quite underrated and therefore underpriced. They do these amazing sweet wines which are just sensationally exciting and delicious. And then they have a great range of reds. You know, here are just 3 reds that we've tried, but there's many more that we sell, and they all have their differences, and they all deliver. I think it's fair to say, without wanting to pat ourselves on the back too much, we have a really good range of Bordeaux wines. It's very carefully picked and curated, and we enjoy selling these wines along with all of the other things that we sell in the shop. But if you're looking for great wine to go with food, maybe to sort of surprise yourself a little bit, maybe to kind of exceed your expectations, if you've had slightly inferior Bordeaux that you might have bought from a supermarket or something like that, you know, there's a lot of it on the market. A lot of the estates perhaps rest on their laurels a little bit, but the good stuff is great, is extremely well priced, and will really deliver. I'm sure we'll be doing this again sometime, but for now, enjoy the rest of your wines, and I'll see you again soon.